Hello and welcome to the Last Mixtape Podcast. My name is Stephen White, and on this week's show, we delve into the Irish acts, artists, albums, and records that made 2024. But first, Irish artists have a tradition of being heavily engaged in what is happening in their own society, so it was important that they had a voice. The words of the late Sinead O'Connor. Why, Stephen? I hear you ask, dear listener and dear viewer, are you quoting iconic Irish artist Sinead O'Connor at the top of this week's show? Well, dear listener and dear viewer, this week we'll be discussing Irish acts, albums and records that have had a cultural impact in 2024. So, disclaimer, as always, this is very much a vibes podcast, and I have indeed changed my ways from the old days of Last Mixtape. So there will be no top 10 or top 20 Irish album countdown this year. Instead, we're going to look at artists, acts and records that have a cultural impact on the year and on society and globally and locally around the world through their music and our actions in 2024 through the lens of some records, some albums and some performances. This is going to be a little different because here on the Last Mixtape Podcast we do reviews a little bit differently here. We look at them through an artistic and societal and sometimes a political lens and discuss them at length. For the national viewership, I hope you follow us along as we delve into the Irish acts and artists that may have had an impact around you, both globally and both locally, and we discuss some of the albums and artists that have really stood out from the year. Now, as always, there are countdowns and lists and top 10s and all of those types of things about some great albums, and in no way am I putting them down. So if you want to check those out, do. I'm sure there's loads of great Irish blogs and magazines and podcasts and all that are doing that. But here we're going to discuss some of the cultural highlights and cultural impacts of Irish artists this year, beginning with, up first, Kneecap. Fine art, biopics, and taking on the Tories. Indeed, starting off with Kneecap, and what better place to start when we talk about cultural impact and cultural change here in Ireland. Kneecap, in the musical sense, with Fine Art released, as I said, probably a classic Irish album in the making, although I did have slight issues with the delivery of it, how the conceptual ideas were put forward in the actual record itself. It's hard to deny, and I will not deny, that these guys are pretty much one of the big cultural icons of 2024 for Ireland and may very well be moving forward. The album itself captured the imagination through its use of hip-hop and the Irish language, and this led on as well to a biopic which on a global scale captured people's imagination as well, telling their side of the story, their life, their background and who they are as artists, whilst also conveying that of their own community and the communities that they live with. It's an incredible work by them this year. They have really kind of punctured through in conveying the Irish experience to outside of Ireland itself and beyond the diaspora and to just people living around the world. Their performances at Glastonbury as well have been incendiary. Their performances live, I think in Reading and Leeds as well, have really also captured imagination of people that you would not expect to kind of vibe with it, you would not expect to connect with it. And yeah, they have really kind of put themselves forth as one of those acts, and Fine Art as well, as a touchstone when we talk about it. As I said, this list is about changing the culture, Irish culture in 2024, and which acts did it. Kneecap, like I think I was saying at a kind of a talk recently, that all you even need to see is kind of like the symbol that they use for themselves and you know exactly who it is. When they kind of had like a premiere for the biopic, the Kneecap biopic, I was walking by in Smithfield and I saw them on the paramilitary, I don't know what you'd call it, but tank, or I don't know what you would call that thing, but they're standing on it, and it's so, the iconography of it, the juxtaposition of it, the situationalism of it, you know, Tony Wilson of Factory Records would be proud. It really does subvert so much. It is challenging. It challenges a lot. It challenged me a lot in my own kind of perceptions of what it is that they put forward. Like the very first time I saw them perform live was at the Rock Against Homelessness gig right before lockdown. It was 2020. The Fontaines also played it, as did the Murder Capital. What a night that was. And they were, once again, incendiary. They were political. They were biting, and they continue to be so in their interviews. I think they do it quite cleverly. I think I said as well in that talk that, you know, whilst they portray these kind of lads about having cans, sitting around, just being the lads, they do it in a way that there is something more to it. There is something more to them. There is a cleverness to who they are, as well as taking on the Tories, as they have recently with the arts grant that was taken away from them and under what seemed like discriminatory circumstances. So that subversiveness, that pushing against governmental kind of norms like that kind of wanting to convey their community and doing so through their music, through fine art, through the film as well. They are very much a multimedia entity that has put the Irish experience, especially the Northern Irish experience, at the forefront through their work, and it's all through their own back. So absolutely, when you talk about culture, when you talk about cultural impact globally and locally in Ireland, Fine Art is the album, but Kneecap through so many other fields this year have done it. So yeah, Kneecap would be very much one of those acts that have changed the culture in Ireland in 2024. Up next, Fontaine's DC, Romance, Sonic Sea Changes, and Greatness. Yeah, so Fontaine's and Romance for the weekend that's in it. At the time of this recording, and they are currently doing a residency, if you want to call it that, at the 3 Arena in Dublin, and very much a hero's return, one of many that the band have had that I've witnessed over the last couple of years. And yeah, a band that, I suppose at the very beginning of their career, really kind of blasted out with Doggerel and with A Hero's Death. This idea of Irishness, this idea of very specifically even like around the Liberties, around Dublin, the Generation Purdue, I think I called it, the lost generation, the frustration therein. So they've almost kind of changed the culture several times around them as they continue to grow, and it was amazing seeing them go from like small venues to places like the Ivy Gardens, to Vicar Street, 3 Arena, 3 Olympia, and then on to the 3 Arena, and how they have grown this year with Romance. Romance is probably, and there is a question about it. I do remember kind of messaging Stephen Byrne from Golden Plague, is like, does this and enter them into the chat? Does Romance enter them into the chat now about great Irish albums, greatest Irish albums of all time? Are they one of the greatest Irish bands of all time? I'm not saying they are the greatest, but are they one of the greatest Irish bands of all time? It's very interesting to think in that way because they've had such a strong run with albums. They are big beyond the confines of Ireland. Yes, they are having a hero's return type gig show in Dublin tonight, and the people going to it, and the fans that they have, and the love that the Irish music fan in general, not all obviously, has for them is quite great. And just like how they have kind of captured a moment is so difficult to do. It's lightning in a bottle stuff, but they do speak to that even in Romance, which is this sonic sea change. I kind of likened it earlier in the year to that of when U2 went from the kind of po-faced, monolithic, overly earnest, maybe at times, sound of Joshua Tree Come Rattling Hum, and then into the kind of uber stylized kind of, I don't want to call it, the Fly character is a construct, but of Achtung Baby, and the change that they had. They, in the music videos for things like Starburst, they looked more like a 90s pop act than they did anything else, but they sounded so incendiary. There are real moments there where you can see that they have cast aside the bonds of being another post-punk band, something that a lot of other acts struggled to do and took a few albums. Idol's one of the bands that I love their album Tanks this year, but I felt they were a band that really struggled to kind of redefine themselves, or continue to in some ways. But Fontaine's DC, I mean, as a band that have captured the culture and changed the culture in Ireland, they continue to do so. That album, Romance, is just a fantastic album by a band that happened to be Irish. And I think it's incredible to see how the artistry at place in terms of the musicality of the record, and also the artistry at place in terms of the visuals. We're also talking about that with Kneecap. It's always been my belief that classic records and classic albums have to have a cultural footprint. It is not good enough alone to be a great album. You need to move around the culture around you. A great example of that would be the Velvet Underground. Did not sell many records, Velvet Underground and Nico. Did not sell that many records as you would think around its time, but influenced so many more. And the iconography around the banana and all those things have become so huge. The iconography around the Fontaines has become so intertwined with them. They are kind of recognizable for certain inflections and ways of being. They are very much part of this new wave of Irish artists, them and Lankum and Kneecap and the Murder Capital and people like this, that have taken Irish tradition and turned it into modernity and turned it into this great music scene that we have now, obviously as a part of the global music scene, and kind of reintroduced that in a way. As I said, my feeling was when they made Scinti Fia that they were going to go into more traditional, kind of almost around about a more gothic version perhaps of Lankum, with kind of the guitars and everything like that. And they completely subverted that, and they completely surprised me with it. Now, the Fontaines are very much still in Romance. Their sound is still in Romance, but there's a lot more experimentation. They don't get lost in sea with it. They don't go too far. It doesn't go, too far away. But there are moments like Favourite, which is just like their best pop song. It's a pop song. It's a pop track. And they have created for themselves all of this room to roam and not being one thing to one people. Over the space of a couple of albums, 4 albums, they've done this. And how incredible that is, that the Fontaines, whilst they do have characteristics to themselves, are not just one thing. The shows and the weekend and the amount of people I saw going to these gigs and the amount of people I've seen at Fontaines gigs and the bands that I see now that are very heavily influenced to them speaks to that changing of the culture and impact on the culture, and also changing like where they're going or what the sound is or where that music is moving forward, because very much so with Romance they have cast aside the shackles of their past and continue to grow. It's also worth saying as well, and the cultural impact globally, the most recent speech they gave at the Rolling Stone Awards about freeing Palestine, using their stature and using their platform to speak about these issues, and they've always done so politically as well. Really stands to them, really stands to being a part of that culture, being a part of that, as I say, that new wave. And we will come on to that a little bit later on in the show. But yeah, Fontaines DC and Romance, yes, they have most certainly changed the culture in 2024. Next up, Lankum, live at Vicar Street, the Choice Music Prize and Traditionalism. Yeah, so this one is a little bit of a cheat on my part, but it's my list, my podcast. I'm a do what I want. And also they released the record Lankum Live, the Vicar Street live album, which I really loved and reviewed in an earlier podcast. But we'd be remiss of talking about changing the culture and having an impact on the culture and Irish culture without including Lankum in that. Earlier this year, we were at the Choice Music Prize, and I kind of reported back from being at that. And yeah, look, they won the award, and very much deserving award winners with that, with their album from last year. But they used that night, and it should be said other artists did as well, Soda Blonde being one of them, they used that night, that performance and that speech to talk about Palestine, to talk about the genocide in Palestine. They used part of their performance to do so. They also did this at Glastonbury. They perpetually used their music and their form and their shape in order to affect change, in order to convey the feeling of the Irish public. Again, we talk about this generation perdue, but this kind of, as I say, the new wave of Irish artists, which takes the traditionalism of folk elements, in their case very much so, and uses them in a kind of a modern context. Their music is so affecting that the political edge of it has an even harder edge. Sometimes when you kind of hear what you could loosely call protest music, it's full of generalities. It's not specific to anything. It is just kind of, thing is bad, this is something. The great thing about kind of the folk music and the sound that they use, it has an earthy feel to it. It has a consequence to it. It has a reality to it. The fact that in that kind of that Choice Music Prize performance, and as I say, the speech, and anyone who's there or listened to it indeed or watched it, will be a testament to, it did capture the moment. Now, obviously, the genocide in Palestine continues, but they and other artists at that time chose to speak out and chose to use what was a big moment in their career and their art and their music in order to talk about it. I think Lancome have always done this, and their music is so affecting in that way. And you can see as well that they are part of that, as I say, that new wave where Irish traditional music and folk music is being, I won't say redefined in any way. I don't think they would even call it that. But it is being modernized to a way that it is not kowtowing to anything and is not compromising to anything. It is bringing the mainstream, as it were, if you want to call it that, to themselves. I mean, their popularity outside of Ireland would also speak to that with Rough Trade and things like that. So they are one of the acts, and I really put them along with Kneecap, Fontaines and themselves and a couple of others, where kind of that generation Purdue, that generation of Irish artists, where they have through creativity and art and music, have used their form and their shape to, as I say, change the culture. And I think, yeah, it is a little bit of a cheat to talk about them because it's a live album that I believe was recorded the year before, and it's talking about an album they won an award for from the year before. But we're talking about having a change in the culture and having an impact on the culture. And I think it would be remiss not to have a list with this or not to have Lancome, because they are so much a part of Irish culture, and indeed their own Glastonbury set was a testament to that as well. So Lancome and Lancome Live, yes, indeed, they did help to change the culture in 2024. Next we have Mary Wallopers, Home Boys Home, far-right protests and fighting the fascists. Indeed, one of the moments of 2024 came from the Mary Wallopers when they protested the far right in Dundalk earlier this year. We spoke about it on the podcast and its relevance to the old quote from, it was from Woody Guthrie's guitar, which was "This machine kills fascists," and Pete Seeger's guitar, which was "This machine surrounds hate and forces it to surrender." It was a great, great moment from the act. I know there were other protesters obviously there, but the Mary Wallopers, from a musical standpoint, really captured the imagination and showed that the Ireland that these far right lunatics convey and try to use and contort to their own will not stand for them and their bullshit. And the use of folk music and the use of a folk act and traditional music as a way to fight the kind of the far right's commodification of Irish culture is such a powerful moment. Having that kind of as well, kind of having Irish acts like the Mary Wallopers, and obviously they're incredible musicians, and they've really kind of like Kneecap and like Lancome as well, have used their music in a lot of ways to convey the kind of political aspects of traditional Irish music and convey it in a way that actually has relevancy and meaning to what its original intention was, and that was not for the far right. And it was indeed for fighting fascism and for fighting people like that. And it was such a powerful moment. It had to be included on the list. And it is kind of a sign of changing the culture and having an impact on the culture, because that far right movement, obviously with the Dublin riots, very kind of fresh in the memory, and obviously had an election this year as well here in Ireland. The need to combat the unimaginative, the nasty, the horrible, the racist, the bigotry, the anti-immigrant kind of ideologies of these people with Irishness, with traditional Irishness, with kind of that, that old-timey kind of, folk feel of, as, Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger, of banding together to push away fascism. And indeed they did in Dundalk, and have continued to do so as well, it should be said too. So that was such a powerful, powerful moment. Obviously, not taking nothing away from their music, because they are a great band. Actually, they played as well at that Rock Against Homelessness gig, what Kneecap played and Fontaines played and all. So a lot of the kind of the heavy hitters of this were at that show. But it's an incredible moment of using Irish folk and using Irish art as a form of protest. And, it's, music as a form of protest as well against the rise of fascism, and it's a powerful moment in 2024, and it is indeed a cultural touchstone in 2024 that we must not forget and must applaud them for, and a great Irish band as well. So do check out their album or their record, Homeboys Home as well. And yeah, the Mary Wallopers having an impact on Irish culture in 2024. In next we have Jazzy, No Bad Vibes, Pop Domination and the Future. Indeed, no conversation about Irish music in 2024 would be complete without Jazzy. 8.9 million monthly listeners on Spotify upon last checking, making her one of the most popular Irish artists, or the most popular Irish artists, solo acts as well on Spotify, and a Brit nomination as well, and kind of redefining what it is to be an Irish pop artist. She also won several awards at the Choice Music Prize, if that does anything for you. But she is an incredible artist and a force of nature on the Irish music scene, and must be applauded and recognised as well as kind of how the generation, which would be many generations below me, not that many, but a few, as well, have absolutely took to her, and how she has exploded beyond the confines of this island itself and far beyond. And it can only seem to get better for her, because she has really just took the bull by the horns, which is such a hard thing to do, especially, you know, when you go up against such heavyweights in that field, to be going up against them and feeling like, and looking like, and acting like, and singing like, and performing like, and releasing tracks that are every bit as good as your contemporaries. You got to give it to her. And 8.9 million people, and I know a lot of people will talk about Spotify, and I know a lot of people will talk about it in those ways, but that's so incredible, and the support for her and the impact that she has, and it's incredible to see. And it's so important to see as well, like pop music, and you have to give as well a nod to CMAT for this as well, for kind of redefining Irish pop, which kind of sometimes falls down by the wayside, especially in these kind of conversations about kind of, you know, oh, indie band is the best band. You know, obviously hear it, and I'm going to be very honest, something you hear, and people will be like talking about, you know, this band is good and this band, and they're always very dismissive of what's popular on the radio, and very dismissive of, you know, a real kind of microcosm of that is here in Ireland we have the Choice Music Prize, which is like an album of the year, but also it has a voted song of the year as well. And people are often very snooty about the song of the year, because it's almost as if it's allowing the proletariat to vote, and what would they know? And it has to be this unknown album you didn't hear anything about, you know, and there's this kind of dismissiveness of it, which is wrong. You know, the importance of pop music, the importance on we're talking about on the culture, and for younger people. And I don't want to be like old man goes to TikTok generation, the me. I'm not doing any of that. But what I am saying is that there's this whole generation listening to her music and really kind of gravitating towards both it and her. And she continues to just kind of break those kind of records. As I say, the most one of the most popular Irish artists on Spotify, and a Brit nomination, everything to boot. Yeah, when you're talking about a cultural impact, there's no greater cultural impact than people actually listening to your fucking music. And that's probably the best cultural impact, because they are willingly doing so. I should point that out as well about Spotify. Say what you will, people are actively looking to listen to our music, and they are indeed doing so. So Jazzy, No Bad Vibes, that she is definitely one of the acts in 2024 that had a cultural impact here in Ireland. Continuing on, we have New Dad, Modra, Dream Pop Scene Setters, and What's Next. Yes, very much one of the albums, one of my favourite albums of the year from New Dad, with their album Modra. And we've spoken about it a lot on the show, actually, the rising dream pop / shoegaze / I don't know what else you want to call that kind of genre. The rising tide of that music here in Ireland once again. And music, you could say, has its origins kind of sort of in Ireland with My Bloody Valentine. As well, who are coming back obviously, and very much timely as well. But New Dad seem to be very much on the forefront of these acts and bands that are creating this sound, and they are so good at it. Virgins are another one, a cool band that I love, that are also kind of on that thing. Obviously Just Mustard as well, in a kind of a more harder version of it. But I really think New Dad are one of those bands that kind of in akin to a My Bloody Valentine or a Cocktail Twins and stuff like that, really find the kind of the textural and the atmospheric verve of that music, which is so hard to do as well, because it's not. At times you can like bore people a little bit with that sound if you don't know what you're doing, and they are very much enacted, do know what they're doing. With Madra, it's visceral at times. It does kind of blend out and kind of ease out. They dive into the textures while it's also giving you something else. And it's, having that kind of band at the forefront of what seems to be a rising scene. Like we have seen, and it's no small thing, like we see that with like bands like Gurriers and bands like Sprints in the kind of the post-punk noise rock field. Ireland is made of many scenes. I don't know if you'll ever see the kind of the one scene to rule them all thing anymore. We've moved into kind of what I think is kind of more of a long tail internet age, if you want to call it that. Have you heard of the internet? No. Wherein all kind of genres have their home, and some will become at times more popular than others and step forward and step back, and there'll be rises and falls, and audiences will move and shift, but there will always be a scene at play there. And very much so New Dad with Madra as well show themselves to be very much the purveyors of that, and very much that, almost in the way we were talking about Fontaines as well, and bands like that, using kind of traditional Irish methods and traditional Irish kind of ways to kind of get into music and relate music and convey music. That argument about, New Dad and My Bloody Valentine and bands like that, and Kevin Shields and stuff like that, really does play into it. It is part of us. It is what we've done. You know what I mean? And they are continuing to kind of carry that forward. As I say, bands like Virgins as well, and Just Mustard, and His Father's Voice as well, out in Limerick. Really cool bands doing this. And it has to be commended. I think Leah Rose too. There's a few solo artists that are really kind of creating that sound as well, and leaning into that kind of alt rock sound too. So yeah, New Dad and Madra is very much one of those records that is at the forefront of the scene, that continues to grow. And it'll be very interesting in 2025 to see how that cultural scene moves and shapes, and does it grow even more. I think actually MBV kind of returning to blow everyone's earbuds out is kind of indicative of that as well, indicative of their return too. So yeah, New Dad and their album Madra, very much changing the culture in 2024. Next up we have Sprints, Letter to Self, Frustration and Delivering on Promise. Indeed, we continue on with Sprints and their album Letter to Self as kind of a centerpiece of the band, indeed showing off all of that promise, and indeed delivering on it with an incendiary record and a number of incendiary live shows to boot as well. They are very much one of the bands, as kind of like with New Dad, as we just spoke about, on the forefront, on the cusp, part of the scene, as we say, in and of the scene and about the scene. And they are very much indicative of that, and their kind of incendiary kind of feel, and the album itself really speaks to, in the same way we were talking about Jazzy in a respect, speaking to like and speaking to people and resonating with people in a certain way, and people actively seeking that out. You have to say that Sprints have done so too. Well, it's also in the same way as like a Fontaines and stuff like that, moving away into more maybe gothic or gothic-y sounds, and some of the records, their most recent single very much spoke to that, of a kind of a move away and into more gothic tones and shapes and sounds, which is very, very interesting. I think Letter to Self as well speaks of that, speaks of now, speaks of 2024, speaks of like the experience of living in Ireland, trying to live in Ireland, and the frustrations therein, of the housing crisis, of unemployment, of kind of this kind of idea the generation Purdue of just this kind of lost future, and the frustrations around that. And I think they do that incredibly well with Letter to Self, which is a record that resonates with that frustration, resonates with the frustration internally and externally. And it is a great, great record for those reasons. It's a compelling record. It grabs the attention as well, and it shows Sprints to be, if we were talking about again like those bands of that new wave of generation of like taking the Irish experience in the same way that Kneecap do, and exporting it out beyond the diaspora. And that's the most important thing, is that it's not just playing it to Irish people in other countries, it's playing it to other countries and resonating with those too. And that's how that kind of global effect happens. I think they're a great band and have delivered really, really well on all their, as I say, their promise with Letter to Self. So Sprints, very much a part of, and as I say, on the scene and of the culture. So yes, very much so. Letter to Self, Sprints, very much changing the culture and being part of the culture in 2024. And finally, Irish artists, Palestine and South by Southwest. The genocide in Palestine has been at the forefront of Irish art for the last year since it began. And we spoke about at the Choice Music Prize earlier this year, the awards were given out, and the show itself, very much the genocide in Palestine was at the forefront and very much kind of loomed over the whole proceedings with some great performances, as I say, by Soda Blonde and as I say by Lankham, and then in their award speech, really calling out what is happening and kind of the juxtaposition of being at an award show and with all the atrocities that are happening in Gaza at this very moment in time and continue to do so. This also played into later on in the year as South by Southwest, the boycott of the actual festival itself due to its connection to the US military or military contractor as well. And that was led by Irish acts such as Kneecap, Sprints, who we just spoke about, Soda Blonde, who we spoke about at the Choice Prize, Chalk, and many more. The list of names is out there. Showing that that kind of, as we say, like almost like with the Mary Wallopers, with the far right protests, that Irish music and Irish art and Irish voices will stand shoulder to shoulder with those in need, especially against the horrific genocide of the Palestinian people that continues to happen. This also then bled into Glastonbury with Irish acts such as Kneecap, such as Lankham, and I believe the Mary Wallopers as well. I'm not entirely sure if I'm remembering that correctly. All in some way referencing it. Whether or not you agreed with how Bambi Thug went about it with the Eurovision, that also loomed over their performance as part of the show as well, and their feelings against the genocide of the Palestinian people. So that kind of aspect has gone through the entirety of Irish music, and not just at the local level. All of these went to an international level, very much so at South by Southwest. There was also, I believe, a similar thing about Latitude. Not just at things like the Choice Prize, but also at bigger events like the Rolling Stone Awards, where the Fontaines used their platform also to speak out against the genocide of the Palestinian people, talking about how Irish art is used and Irish music is used as a way to combat fascism, as a way to combat oppression, and a way to combat something like a genocide in Palestine and in Gaza is so important. And to see Irish acts engaging on that on an international level, on a global scene, where it could, and the bravery of it, because, and obviously bravery is a relative thing in this circumstance, obviously, but on the bravery of it in terms of what it could do to one's career, especially for those in South by Southwest who had obviously sunk so much into going over, and to make that decision. For the as well, Fontaine's at the Rolling Stones Awards, no one knows where that would go. Also, you have to say with musical artists such as May Kay, who you often see, who released a song to help raise funds for it. Soda Blonde also, as well, just kind of speaking on it, talking of it, and keeping it in the conversation. Lankham as well, as I say, with the Choice Prize. How Irish artists have used their platform to protest that, and have used their music and their art to protest that, is probably the biggest way that Irish acts on a global scale and locally have affected and changed the culture here. And it shows that art has that ability, maybe not to wholly affect change, but indeed shine a light on it. The protest gigs, the gigs for Gaza that happened all around Ireland, the marches as well, all had a musical component to them in some form. And that kind of willingness to use that. It's interesting, I was watching an interview with Tommy Tiernan. He was being interviewed by an American comedian who was speaking to him about the Irish experience and why and how that created folk music. And Tommy was kind of speaking about colonialism and, how Irish people felt under the yoke of colonialism, and how that actually then, strangely, once, the British were removed from the Republic of Ireland, and that led to the Catholic Church taking charge. And once the Catholic Church were removed from power, as it were, the banks were kind of moved on. And that kind of but how the Irish people created music and folklore and stories because it was free. It was a way of almost protesting and using our culture and using our identity in a way that could not be taken away from us. And the power of using that and to help and to shine a light and to talk about the people of Gaza. Ireland being one of the countries, while not talking about our political leaders at all, but the Irish people have very much had their voices being heard about this and very much are calling out what is an atrocity, the killing of children, the killing of individuals, the killing of innocents, and what is essentially and is a genocide. And that Irish Acts this year and previous year as well, obviously, because it started in October. This campaign started in October, rather, is such a powerful thing. And all those acts and all those Irish acts engaging in that, very much changing the culture in 2024. And as if there were to be a number one in this, and there isn't, that is very much the most important part of Irish acts changing the culture in 2024. But that's it for this list. I know it's a little bit unconventional, a little bit different. I hope you liked it. I hope you kind of got what we were trying to do here. So no more top 10s or anything like that. The Count of Monty playlist though will be back though, so don't worry about him. He is very much waiting in the wings to talk about some music. But the importance of talking about changing culture and the effect on culture and albums and speaking about them through this way. But what albums, artists, moments in the Irish music scene do you think I missed? What ones out of this list was your favourite? What ones do you think should have been more spoken about? What were your thoughts? Put them in the comments below and let me know what you thought about Irish acts changing the culture in 2024. So it goes, and there it went. But before I go, thank you for listening and watching the Last Mixtape podcast here on YouTube, Spotify, and on Apple. If you could like, share, and subscribe and help the Last Mixtape podcast grow, I would be eternally grateful. You can also send on your music to me via Stephen@thelastmixtape.com, and I'll be sure to send them on to the Count of Monty playlist, who shall return next week with a very special episode. But I won't give away too much right now. But for now, that was the Last Mixtape podcast. I was Stephen White. You were the listener. Hey, so long.